Elijah, one of the most powerful prophets in the Bible. His life is filled with amazing miracles, intense confrontations with false gods, and an extraordinary connection with God. Let's begin with who Elijah was. Elijah was a prophet in ancient Israel. His name, Elijah, means, "My God is Yahweh," which is a pretty big clue about what he stood for. He was all about pointing people back to the true God of Israel, Yahweh. This was a tough job because Elijah lived during the reign of King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, and let me tell you, they weren't exactly supporters of the one true God. In fact, they were promoting the worship of the false god Baal, and that's where our story gets interesting. So, Elijah's first major act as a prophet was bold. He went straight to King Ahab and told him that there would be a severe drought in Israel. No rain. Nothing. A complete famine. Why? Because the people were worshipping Baal, the god of rain and fertility. But Elijah declared that only the true God, Yahweh, could bring rain, and that would not happen until Elijah said so. So, imagine the king's face. He wasn't happy, but Elijah didn't back down. He was a man of faith and courage. Now, this drought lasted for 3 years, and it affected everyone. But God didn't leave Elijah high and dry. He took care of him in an amazing way. After Elijah made that bold prophecy, God told him to go hide by a small stream called Brook Cherith, east of the Jordan River. And here's where it gets super interesting. God sent ravens to bring him food every day. I mean, can you imagine? Ravens, those big, dark birds, bringing you bread and meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But as the drought worsened, the brook dried up, and Elijah had to move. So God told him to go to a widow's house in Zarephath in Phoenicia. This widow was living in a foreign land, and she had almost nothing, but Elijah's visit was about to change her life forever. When Elijah arrived at the widow's house, he found her gathering sticks to make the last meal for her and her son. They were starving, but Elijah told her, "Don't be afraid. Make me a small loaf of bread first, and then you can make some for yourself and your son. The Lord will make sure your jar of flour and jug of oil never run out until the rains come." The widow did what Elijah asked, and miraculously, her oil and flour never ran out. Every time she went to make bread, there was just enough. This was a true testament to God's provision and faithfulness. It was an incredible sign that when we trust God, He provides in ways we can't even imagine. Things take a dramatic turn in the next part of the story. Unfortunately, the widow's son falls ill and dies. Now, this is a heartbreaking moment, but Elijah steps in with great faith. He prays to God, asking him to bring the boy back to life. And guess what? God answers. Elijah stretches out over the boy 3 times, and God raises him from the dead. This miracle of resurrection is not only a display of God's power but also a reminder of His ability to restore life, literally and spiritually. Now, we're about to dive into one of the most dramatic moments in Elijah's life. After years of drought and famine, Elijah had had enough of the people's disobedience and false worship. He challenged the 450 prophets of Baal to a showdown. Here's the challenge: they would each prepare a sacrifice, but no fire. The God who answered by sending fire would be the true God. The prophets of Baal spent all day praying, chanting, and even cutting themselves, but nothing happened. Zero. Zilch. No fire. Then, Elijah steps up. He repairs the altar of Yahweh, prepares the sacrifice, and even pours water all over it, 3 times. Now, this is a big deal because water would make it harder to catch fire. But Elijah was showing he trusted God completely. Elijah prays, and in an instant, fire from heaven consumes the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water. The people who witnessed this are stunned. They fall on their faces and cry out, "The Lord, He is God." Then Elijah orders the prophets of Baal to be seized and executed. This victory wasn't just a miracle, it was a bold declaration that Yahweh is the one true God. After such a huge victory, you'd think Elijah would be on top of the world, right? But no. Jezebel, Ahab's wife, hears about what happened and threatens to kill Elijah. She's furious that her prophets were killed, and Elijah is in her sights. Fearful for his life, Elijah flees into the wilderness. He even prays, "God, I've had enough. Take my life." But God didn't give up on Elijah. Instead, God sent an angel to provide food and water, strengthening Elijah for a journey to Mount Horeb, also called Mount Sinai. When Elijah reaches Mount Horeb, he is exhausted and discouraged. But it's here that something profound happens. God tells Elijah to stand on the mountain because he is going to pass by. There's a great wind, an earthquake, and fire, but Elijah doesn't find God in any of these dramatic displays. Instead, he hears a gentle whisper. This is where God speaks to him, not in the mighty displays of power but in a calm, quiet voice. This moment is so significant because it reminds us that God doesn't always show up in the big, loud moments. Sometimes, he speaks in the quiet, still moments of our lives. We just need to listen. After Elijah's time on the mountain, God tells him to anoint Elisha as his successor. Elisha becomes Elijah's faithful companion and follows him, learning from him, and eventually takes over as the prophet of Israel after Elijah's departure. Now, here comes the most dramatic part of Elijah's story. As Elijah and Elisha are walking along the Jordan River, suddenly, a chariot of fire and horses of fire appear, and Elijah is taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. This is one of the most incredible events in the Bible, showing how closely Elijah walked with God. It was a fiery and spectacular end to his time on earth. So, what can we take away from the life of Elijah? First, boldness. Elijah was never afraid to stand up for what he believed in, even when it seemed like everyone else was against him. Second, faith. Elijah trusted God in the most impossible situations, and God came through in incredible ways. And third, God's provision. Whether it was ravens feeding Elijah or the miraculous supply of flour and oil, God provided when it seemed like there was no way. Elijah's story shows us that even in the darkest of times, we can trust God to be faithful. That's it for today's video on Elijah, a prophet of fire, miracles, and faith. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Let us know in the comments what you think, which part of Elijah's story stood out the most to you. Thanks for watching, God bless.